Hello, my name's Janet Stilson, and I'm very happy to be moderating this webinar with Networked Insights. John Wanamaker famously said, "I know I waste 50% of my media spend. I just don't know which 50%. And in today's fragmented world of media, it can be argued that it's more like 75% of your media spend that's wasted, or at least inefficient. The reason for this is obvious. Your customer is now in charge of how and when they can consume media today, anywhere from the line at Starbucks or in front of their TV while also on their iPad. It's a marketer's nightmare to try and hit this ever-moving target across the full spectrum of media that they control: paid, earned, and owned. The terms paid, earned, and owned media have recently become very popular in the marketing world. In fact, taken together, they can be applied as a simple way for marketers to categorize and ultimately prioritize all of the media options that they have. Firms like Research in Motion, Miller Coors, and Toyota have been some early pioneers in the space. They now categorize all of their global media spending into these three buckets of paid, earned, and owned. Many agencies like Starcom MediaVest are also using the model to help develop media strategies. Yet, as popular as this theme has become, it is very often interpreted loosely across the industry, resulting in everyone speaking a very different language. Networked Insights believes there is a need to define the space clearly and also provide the missing link that makes analysis of this space truly revolutionary for marketing, a way to measure and sequence these three forms of media. Before we delve into the presentation, I want to give you a little information about the format of this session. After I give an introduction to today's speaker, the presentation will begin. As it proceeds, feel free to send in a question. At the end of the presentation, we'll answer your questions. Feel free to add a question to the queue during the question and answer period. We'll get to as many as possible during the time allowed, and of course, we will send you a copy of the slides afterwards to sit back and relax. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce Networked Insights founder and CEO, Dan Neely. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Dan has over 10 years of management, operational, and entrepreneurial experience with technology, manufacturing, and services companies. He has always loved data and math. He studied risk management and insurance to become an actuary, but while pursuing that career path, the enormous value presented by the world's largest set of consumer intelligence ever assembled, social data, provided a way to apply his passions and skills to a much bigger opportunity. Before launching Networked Insights in 2006, he served as Scient Director of Strategy. Scient was the fastest-growing services company in history. It had a successful IPO, grew to over 2,000 colleagues, and launched over 40 e-businesses. Before Scient, he worked on the team that launched eSurance, the first online insurance company. Dan is a sought-after speaker and has been quoted as an expert resource in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and USA Today, and he has appeared on Fox Business News. So, without further ado, Dan Neely.
Thanks so much, Janet, and thanks everyone for joining today. We're going to go through a series of discussions here where we talk about social in the context of media planning and how it can provide an advantage to your business. And so as we go through the slides today, certainly think about the activities that you're doing now, the activities you've done in the past, not necessarily in the context of social media, but in the context of broad marketing and advertising as a whole. And we'll talk about how we've seen some of the trends that are now impacting those activities that are taking place. So today we'll talk about 7 different ways to inform media planning using social intelligence and social data. So the question often comes up, why use social data to inform our media plan? What is the value of this? Well, if we think about it, let's not use the term social media. Let's use the term that it's 450 million people. That's 200 million people in the U.S. And if we had a way to gauge that unbiased point of view and not use it just to determine what are people saying about us, but use it to determine what's important to them, what is happening through the lens of the customer, not what are they saying just about our brands in a post-measure structure where we're just trying to figure out how many times were we mentioned and what is the sentiment around our brand, but we're using it instead as a pre-informed activity, an activity that allows us to make data-driven decisions rather than just gut-based decisions. We need data to imply on our gut to say, okay, this is the right decision for us to make, or it's directionally the wrong decision to make, and our customer can tell us what that is. So we need a way to figure out what are all the trends in this data, because as many of you on the call know, that's the complexity. The complexity is there's too much of it. And so if we think about this from a macro trend standpoint, we have to be able to apply very rich analytics and deep analytics and analytical technologies to help us get to a better set of decisions and a better set of insights. So let's talk about the macro trends as a whole. If we think about, let's go back a little way in time. Maybe we'll go back before the web really took off. And if we think about the amount of time spent by the enterprise, there was a lot of time spent in data gathering, and data gathering was ultimately the very strategic thing. It was 37,000 interviews that were done to inform the segmentation schema, and it was hard to do, and only those people that could do it at scale were really the winners. Think of the large consulting companies that exist today, the strategic consulting companies that exist today. Little time was spent in action, but more time was spent in data gathering. Then what happened is the web came along. And the web ultimately flipped this curve completely. And it flipped this curve such that data gathering was now really simple, and we spent a lot of time in action. It's argued that Google won in this space. We all remember when going into Google and we'd search for something and we'd find these very rich insights, these things we didn't know existed before, and now all of a sudden we had instant access to them, and it was really powerful. And it was great, and because we could spend time in actioning, right? This is where we saw the growth of e-commerce. It's where we saw the growth in paid search and SEO. Then what happened is the consumer web came along, and it flipped the curve again. And it flipped the curve because now the amount of information that's being created wasn't just being created by the companies that were on the web. It was being created by every user on the web. And so it became complex again. It became we're data gathering now, and now we're trying to gather the data everywhere. We're trying to, if you think about the companies that are out there just monitoring, right? They're trying to gather this information and ultimately figure out what to do with it, and that means we spent a small amount of time in actionability. Then the real-time web came along, where we have to be able to interact and react in real time, and it's allowed us to flip the curve. But the technologies that are allowing us to flip this curve and take advantage of it, the same way we did when Google allowed us to do it because of search, those technologies become discovery-based rather than search-based. Right? We can't look for the things that we care about anymore because there's too much data out there. So the curve has flipped again, and we're spending time in, less time in data gathering and more time in action. And so fundamentally, we have to find this, a contextual discovery. Let me learn the things my customer ultimately wants and cares about. Let me not just search for the things that I know to look for. And so that is that's what's happening from a macro standpoint. Many companies are stuck in the middle two stages of this graph and haven't quite made it to the last stage of this graph because they want to search for the things that they knew to search for. But trying to find them is becoming more and more complex because of the amount of information and data that's being created. So let's apply that model to a media planning structure. So ultimately, as a brand, you can't afford to outspend your ecosystem. Pepsi and Coke, you can't afford to outspend each other on everything. You can afford to outspend each other on certain programs, but ultimately you can't afford to outspend each other on overall. You certainly cannot afford to outspend the entire ecosystem. And so an example here on the left-hand side of this chart is how do we take our media spend, if let's say we're spending $100 million a quarter or $300 million a quarter, and we ultimately have to try and compete with the Microsofts, the Apples, the AT&Ts of the world, how do we use that? And how do we say, okay, how do we amplify what we're doing today and use the indicators from social to ultimately carry that for us? And so how do we use this to pre-inform before we've made any decisions? This is not about just saying, hey, what actually happened? How much social reach did we get? No, it's how much social reach will we get? And so we can shift the discussion. And so if we're pre-informing, we can now use the data to say, how do we think this is actually going to work? And so what we see is we see an amplification. And so allowing for massive media efficiency, allowing for at least 10% of your spend to come back to you, right? Allowing at least 10% efficiency across your entire media spend. We're not just talking digital here. We're talking traditional TV spend. And how do we leverage those things? We're talking across all paid, earned, and owned, because it becomes about sequencing, how we put these things together, when we put these things together, and ultimately what becomes valuable. So that when, as a CMO or as an agency, you walk into your client or to your CFO and you're saying, hey, you know what? I'm able to give you 3 cents of EPS, but I'm able to get the same amount of awareness. That's hugely valuable in the proposition that we're going after. So we're going to talk about 7 different ways, and these are the 7 areas that we'll cover today. And these are based on work that we've done with our clients in pre-informing buys today and allowing them to go after optimization and efficiency, whether it be we're locked out of something or we're trying, we have a limited amount of dollars that we can ultimately invest in this, or we've cut back on our investments and, we used to be 150 million and now we're 120. How do we make sure it's at the same levels it was before? So let's jump into the first one, which is optimization of a current buy. Currently, the economics of transactions around TV are with Nielsen. They use a rating point system, and you pay a certain amount of money for those rating points. There's gross rating points, and then there's target rating points. And being able to use those target rating points to say, maybe on a quarterly basis, I at least know that I want 150 TRPs. I know that that's what I've got to be able to achieve, and being able to leverage that. We've been able to prove that by looking at social data and engaging your brand with more social programs for your segments, you're able to actually get a greater reach for your brand. We've seen that overall, if I looked at the highest levels, the top 20 shows for Nielsen versus the top 20 shows in social, there's about a 62% increase in reach, which is significant. And there's a significant increase in reach that we can take advantage of. The transaction that you'll ultimately go through as a brand or as an agency is based on the Nielsen rating points. But ultimately, if we know there are extra rating points out there available to us that we can integrate the brand with, then we can find places where we can take advantage of the economic system that exists today. So, in working with just one example with one client, they had an investment of $7 million that they put out there and that they were targeting into TV. And we were able to look at that and say, okay, how are we ultimately going to make this perform better? And we were able to find a series of programming and working with their agency, figure out how do we, let's see what amount of awareness we're able to get, what amount of rating points we're ultimately able to go after. So when we look at this, we can either see it as an investment that gets extra reach, or we're going to decrease our overall investment because it allows us to get that additional reach. So we're seeing significant numbers. We're seeing significant examples of where clients are able to take advantage of the system and being able to connect them together. Because this is the first time that we've really been able to, as an industry, connect digital and TV together in a way where the connection points are by the customer and the consumer versus those connection points being by the people that own the ecosystem, the networks, or the rating systems that exist. So the next example is finding shows before they go mainstream. We've been fortunate and touted by a couple of people where we predicted Modern Family becoming a big show, and it's because we're not just looking at the overall commentary that's happening around them, but we're looking at how big are they becoming, what is the overall reach, how fast is this swell around the show happening, and also what are the key trends around those shows so we know what is brand right for a show. The fact that a show is becoming large is not necessarily an indicator that it's the most valuable show to a specific brand, because we have to make sure it's brand right, of course. And so in finding those shows, we're able, again, to take advantage of the ecosystem. As we go into upfronts, we're obviously at the start of that process, but as we go into upfronts, it's looking at what are the pilot programs that are coming out, what's being pitched, what ultimately has a set of value. And as a brand or as an agency, do you have some influence over that? And if you have influence over it, as far as creative direction or integration, we know which ones we're going to pick. Again, this is it's a leading indicator of what is going to be a success versus using a post measure and, hey, how has this person performed in the past? No, we're going to use those things to predict what we believe is happening. And fortunately, we've been accurate enough where we have been able to predict which shows are going to be bigger than others. So what advantage does this give to a client or to an agency? Ultimately, you're able to lock in at a lower rate, right? So if I think about the rates that you would be charging versus as you get into the season and the show starts growing, your ability to lock those dollars in and be able to invest at a lower level and be able to have that truly strategic relationship with these shows as they are emerging becomes hugely valuable as we go down that path. So let's talk about the third one, audience segmentation. It's often, as people look at audience segmentation, there's the old world, which was we talked about before, 37,000 interviews trying to figure out what's relevant and what's not. But if we're trying to go after, let's say we're trying to go after a sports audience, which I believe is one of the examples that we've used here, trying to go after a sports audience, and we ultimately can't get that sports audience because we're locked out of it, right? We're not able to engage with them. One of our competition has them. And so how can we find where else that audience goes? What other programming do they consume? What other web and digital destinations do they go after? What other types of content do they like? If we can figure those things out, which we've been able to do, we can now take advantage of the path that a consumer takes and ultimately gets to transaction versus just saying, hey, you know what, we need to go after sports because that's where it's at from a reach standpoint. No, we can now get and hone in on that same audience and take advantage of them and take advantage of the opportunity as we go forward. So finding those audiences through context and conversation and leading to that more efficient buy. And so it's the result, which is very highly valuable. While there's not numbers here, we can obviously everyone on the phone that's engaged around this topic before can think about it. But getting a premium audience without paying premium prices, getting a sports audience without paying sports prices becomes hugely valuable. And again, it's a matter of looking at those indicators. It's not just about number of mentions. There's plenty of companies out there that count number of mentions and look at post-measure activity. No, it's about looking at what are the things that are interacting with each other, what are the trends that are impacting each other, and how do we use those and leverage them to say, yeah, this is an audience that's going to be valuable to us. So let's go on to the fourth one. So the fourth one is maximization of paid, earned, and owned, sequencing of events. And so we as a company believe in sequencing of events, and whether it's owned first, paid first, earned first, it varies and it matters. And being able to put those things together becomes hugely valuable. The process by which you look at, what are these things that are going to happen? When are they going to happen? The cool thing about what we're doing as a company is we've seen these trends millions of times. We're able to go back and look in history and say, what exactly happened the last time? What happened when something else like this took place? Where did it flow? Where did it travel to? And we're able to correlate those things together because of the indicators of what a company is trying to do. So our ability to leverage that and say, okay, ultimately, when we talk about media and making media more efficient, it is about paid, earned, and owned media. It's not just about paid. It's about how do you use those things and what is going to be the fuel that allows us to go after those additional impressions. And so for one of our clients, we were able to, they were launching a new game. And in the launch of that new game, it was the next in a series of games that have been out there before. And so we looked at the previous release, and we saw that they had spent $30 million on the launch of that game. And they got a certain amount of awareness during the first month or so. And as they stopped spending, it plateaued, and it went flat as far as growth around awareness. And then what we saw is we saw it take off on its own, and we saw the consumer take this from a messaging and positioning standpoint that they'd used. And we saw it grow. We saw it grow at a huge trajectory. So what we did is we took that as far as what had happened on the previous instance of the game, and then we brought it to the latest version. And on that latest version, we applied the knowledge that we had around what had happened, and we applied it to day one. And so instead of spending that $30 million that they had spent on the launch of the previous game, they were now spending $18 million. They got a greater amount of awareness as a result, and they were able to get a reach and a relationship with a broader set of customers rather than just the set of customers that they were engaged with. So huge value in being able to look at what has happened and what are the trends that are happening here, what are the things that are impacting each other, and how do we leverage those things and use them together as we move forward and making decisions to say, hey, you know what, we can actually project and say if we spend this amount of money, we're ultimately going to achieve these types of results. So it's a matter of being able to do that in a pre-informed, very structured way that allows us to take advantage of it. Let's go on to number 5. So celebrities. Celebrities are a huge piece of many organizations. Typically, you'll see transactions taking place which are done through management, right? They're transactions where a significant amount of money crosses the transom, and they want to, because celebrities are ultimately looking to, use their brand and leverage their brand and obviously get paid for that. But there's a new world, a new paradigm that's happening in celebrity endorsement. And we're starting to see it, and you've seen this with a number of the celebrities that you probably saw in the Super Bowl. But making a series of decisions that are the right celebrity, and going and having a discussion with that celebrity in a way which is how they transact. They transact based on things like Q-score and reach and so forth, and overall influence. Well, as a brand, you have the same things. You have those things as well. So when you go in and have a conversation with a celebrity, as we've done with a number of our clients, you can now have a discussion around, hey, you know what? We're happy to invest, right? We're not saying that there's no money that's going to change hands, but ultimately you're able to go and have a discussion around, hey, you know what? Our brand is going to deliver a set of value to you as well, and it's no longer just conversation, because those conversations have happened before. Now we can empirically walk in and say, here's what the reach looks like. Here's the value we're going to deliver to you, and we're able to show that. Because the investments that you're making in building your consumer base and building ultimately the audience that you have. So that's one way that we're working with celebrities. The other way we're working with celebrities is, focus groups are ultimately really slow. I mean, that if you're on this call, you're probably intrigued by that, and you know that that there is a changing world out there. But if you think about how slow they are, they can often be highly biased, and they're sometimes biased in a way which is, hey, here's some great creative. Let me show you the creative. Do you like this or not? Well, if the creative is killer, my guess is most people in a focus group are going to say they love it. Most people in aided awareness are going to say they love it as well. And so how do we get to a place where we can actually look at what is the unbiased point of view around this celebrity? What ultimately do we think about this celebrity? And let's get an indicator of where we think they're going, rather than leveraging things like just the Q-score or the E-score. Let's think about where they're going in their trajectory. What are the content elements that we should be engaging around with this specific celebrity? Let's bring those things together and say, you know what, this has a great match for us. We're going to predict how big we think this is going to be. And this works for music selection when it comes to launching a product or a series of commercials. It works for specific celebrity endorsement. There's a whole series of ways that we can use this and leverage it when it comes to the overall media opportunity and the media plan itself. So we've been able to have discussions with celebrities, and a number of them, again, you would have seen in the Super Bowl, have discussions around spending the right amount of money because we know what value that celebrity is going to deliver to us, and be able to bring that back into the fold as a discussion. So let's go on to the next one. So the tournament kicked off today, and we'll talk about identifying content that plays specifically to a target. So we have a number of clients that are unable to advertise in the NCAA. They're unable to advertise in the NCAA because competition has locked them out, or they don't have the budget to spend in the NCAA. And as I go through this discussion, for those of you on the phone that think about the NFL and what's going on there with the potential lockout, think about this in the context of that. And so, sometimes it's too hard to get in. We have there's a company that spent $42 million to get into the NCAA, have placement of product, have great commercials, have wonderful creative, have digital integrations, have content distribution, and that's great. That was the right thing for their brand to do. But what we look at as we think about the NCAA is, that's $42 million. That's great. That's someone has chosen to do that. So what are other ways that we can identify an opportunity? Well, what we did was, with the NCAA, the great thing is we can go back and look in history. So we looked at the NCAA in the past, and we used a piece of technology we have at Networked Insights called the topical discovery engine. And what it allows us to do is look for trends and how trends impact each other. So it's not looking just for a single trend. It's saying, okay, which of these trends do you need to do together, and what will ultimately create the greatest set of awareness and the greatest audience that's out there. What we were able to identify was last year it wasn't about Duke, and it wasn't about the big teams, the number one teams. It wasn't about Dickie V. It wasn't about any of those things. It turns out it actually was about upsets. What we saw is we saw huge social reach around upsets. We saw a huge search happening around the upsets as well. And so what we did is we were able to put a program together. We partnered with some of the content channels. We were able to get a series of upset video and leverage that to create a way to take advantage of this trend. And so what you'll see in the NCAA this time through is you'll see the brands that we work with attached to that as a specific opportunity. So they've now got a whole series. They've got what we'll describe as an upset channel, and they've used this year's content to be able to go after that and be able to leverage it. And so they're able to take advantage of it. And so what we're going to be able to do is, what is the investment? What is the minimal effective amount that we had to spend in media, that we had to spend in content, that we had to spend? The same thing that, if you think about that $42 million. Well, the projections that we were able to come in with were, there's almost 900 million impressions that we're able to go after with this upset opportunity, with this trend that we're able to identify, this content that we're ultimately able to look at. And the investment was minimal. Investment was $2 million. So that, to us, when we have that conversation with the agency, and when then together we have that conversation with the brand, it's about, there's $40 million of waste in these other programs, and they may be waste to us, but they may be valuable to someone else. But ultimately, in order to be able to go and get this audience, I'm able to invest $2 million and get a massive amount of awareness by integrating my brand with the right set of content, by attaching to a trend that we know is going to be huge. And again, we're able to look back in history and look back at the data. So sure, next year, a whole bunch of people are going to try and take advantage of this opportunity as far as upsets go. But in reality, we're constantly looking for trends. So we're constantly able to innovate, work with brands to say, here's what you can ultimately own, and here's the thing you can ultimately go after. So then the last one is how we think about integrating your brand with a show. And I would say Toyota's done a great job of this. Toyota has been able to leverage their creative and integrate it directly with a show that's allowed them to get an increased set of reach, ultimately allowing them to spend their dollars wisely and very efficiently to ultimately get to a place where the brand integration is correct. And it's certainly any brand. It shouldn't be about guessing anymore. It should be about how do you take something and pre-inform those activities, ultimately get to a place where if you think about the planning process is something that has this major component, which is insight and research and understanding. And if we can make that hyper efficient and get it to a place where it is truly a feedback mechanism that allows us to make these types of decisions and say, hey, I need to test that really quick. I need to test my gut. The same way that we've done testing in buying for a long period of time in buying media, we're going to start doing major types of testing when it comes to planning, because we can apply the solution, the potential plan, onto the data set because there is so much of it. So we can give indicators to say how we believe something is going to perform, so that it no longer is about a bet or a risk or something having not enough inventory. We can actually make informed decisions as to the answer that will be out there. So those are the 7 things, and here's another piece that we work on at Networked Insights. And there's a number of companies that did some things around the Super Bowl, and I'm sure they were great. But for us, it's about business value. It's about what was the investment and what was the ROI. Chrysler certainly had a significant lift, right, as far as their overall brand awareness and engagement, and it was huge. But the amount of money they had to invest was so significant that they arguably bought a lot of that social lift. They purchased it, which doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to get fans directly, right? It doesn't mean you're going to get people that love your brand that are going to continue that relationship with you. You just happen to buy I like to describe it as in media, we have to move away from buying every lottery ticket, because if you buy every lottery ticket, you're probably going to win, versus buying those that actually have a set of intelligence around them. So let's go after, we look at Teleflora, right? I mean, a company like Teleflora has been able to take advantage of their brand and take advantage of the opportunity where they place, and they've been able to get a huge amount of social reach by investing really smart dollars as they go down the path. So we have we have a number of things there that we do. And if you check out our website, check out our homepage, we do a number of these reports that you can gain access to. We do a number of things around upfronts, a number of things around the Oscars. We've done positioning around celebrities, and you'll see a number of those that certainly are interesting conversation pieces and certainly thought starters as we move down this path as a business. So the way we like to work as a business is that we like to think about all media and how they interact with each other. There is value in each of these areas, right? Whether it be owned, earned, or paid, right? As we think about who do we have and what are we trying to do with them? Who can we leverage? How can we engage in a conversation? There's been much discussion around influencers, and you see that we don't call any of these three categories, prospects, customers, advocates, influencers. Because what we've seen in the information, the data, and the trend is influencers, which are often seen as the person that has the most followers, the person that has the most fans, the person that has the most of XYZ. What we're actually seeing is that secondary influencers are becoming more valuable, and ultimately are something where a brand wants to engage in a relationship because we can leverage them in one of these aspects. So how do we think about sequencing? How do we think about the right set of events that are going to take place? Because going straight to paid and doing paid first, sometimes isn't going to work. There's going to be significant waste there, and the same is true in the other two categories. So for us, it is about the sequencing of events that are going to happen. And what that means organizationally is you're going to see some of this collapse. I think we're starting to see some of the innovative brands put these together and say, okay, that's the thing that I want to go after. That's the thing that I'm going to use. So that's certainly how we think about it from a media standpoint. So we're doing this across many companies. Today, as a business, we plan $5 billion of media. That's what we're doing today. It's a significant number. It's a number that allows us to think about how are we seeing these trends across media. How are we helping and working in this planning process? We're not buying media. We have no interest in buying media. We want to help inform and get that plan to the most efficient place possible. So we work with brands, and through those brands we then work with their agencies to help them figure out what is the next thing, what is the leading indicator that can help make that decision and help make an informed decision as we move forward into the next stages of the business. So as a gift for being on today's call, we have an ebook that certainly you're all welcome to go and gain access to. The link is there, the bit.ly link, but it's 5 new tricks for media planning. It goes into a little more depth and detail of how we can leverage some of the things that we're doing at Networked Insights and how you can apply them to your brand or how you can use them for your clients as an agency. And so I'd encourage you to go and get access to that and use it and leverage it however you see fit. And certainly, if there are questions that you guys have, certainly let us know. So this is just my final slide, and that's my contact information is there. If you have specific things that you want to reach out, and ask us about. We're headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm sure for many of you you now know where that is based on what's going on in the news. And then we have a major presence in both New York and Chicago as a business. So I'd love to turn it over for questions. Janet, if you have questions that are queued up.
I do, and thank you so much, Dan. We have a number of very interesting questions. The first one comes from Sumit Batra. I hope I'm not boggling your name, who works at Mindshare. And the question is, while you mentioned certain amount of money invested yielding much higher ROI, how was that money utilized differently than earlier?
Sure. So what happened, I'm assuming we're talking about the TV spend. So what happens is There are two ways that it happens. One is a media plan has been put together. That media plan has been created by the agency, so it would be created by someone like a Mindshare. And in that plan, we look at it and we say, okay, this is ultimately what we think we're going to go after, and you want to think about. This becomes that next filter, which says, hey, we're going to kick these types of investments out, and we're going to increase investments in these other areas. So that's one way that it happens. The other is where it's completely greenfield, and that there is no plan that's been put together. There's opportunity because, say, a product launch is coming in place, and all it is that we're just interacting earlier on in the planning process, where we're sitting with the agency and with the client. And sometimes with the publisher themselves to say, okay, what is the opportunity that we see here? There's a true greenfield opportunity. Let's say there's a new segment we want to go after, or we're underperforming in a certain segment, and we've chosen not to invest in these specific locations. Let's make sure that's correct, because we can start finding some interesting insights as far as what those shows are ultimately about and what the audiences are about within them. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. Here's another question from the same person. Since we are only talking about ROI, what was the impact on awareness? Because we are only targeting niches while our ROI was increased, our brand awareness might have decreased, hence resulting in lower awareness among the future TG.
Absolutely. So we're talking about metrics that are key to what we do. Awareness, and it's taking it to that next layer of not only awareness around the key brand indicators, but what are the emotional indicators around awareness? What is the awareness within a specific segment? What's happening with the key purchase drivers as well? So the ability to take we obviously look at these 7 things we talked about today, we looked at in a vacuum. As in the discussion today, but we don't do that when we're working with our clients. It's hey, we've got indicators of what we're going to do in TV. We know the key purchase drivers that we're looking at and measuring against those to say, okay, truly have we affected the plan? So it isn't just about a pre-inform activity. It's also about the ability to have this post-measure component to determine what was broken along the path. So if we start seeing decreases in awareness, we're able to adjust the plan as a result of that. But we can also test to say where we believe awareness is going to go, again, because we have millions of these trends that we've seen before, and we can apply it to that data set.
Okay. Here's a question from Jenny Reed of 22 Squared. What's your definition of social data? Primarily Facebook and Twitter, or is it compiled from research from networks through blogs, et cetera?
Social data for us today, we have access to about 92% of the web. It's anything where the consumer is engaging through commentary. It could be a CNN article that ultimately has commentary attached to it. It could be a blog. It could be Facebook. It could be Twitter. There are ultimately 7 broad categories that we think about it in Networked Insights. And so you've got blogs, you've got forums, you've got microblogs, so a la Twitter. You've got news feeds, you've got photo, you've got video, and then you have ratings and reviews. If I look at across that entire spectrum, it represents about 92% of the web and the destinations that people are visiting today.
Okay. Next question.
Real quick on that last question. The other component that we've seen as far as value in that is the overlays of other information that we're putting on top of it. It isn't just the fact that we have access to social data. It's the fact that we can segment that data as well. So whether it's our relationships with Quantcast and Comscore and Google and Facebook, and being able to leverage their information to do other things with the data, or is it the overlays that we're doing of other structured data? So let's say one of our clients is an e-commerce company. Our ability to take some of the information from their e-commerce systems and overlay it onto social data in working through that partnership with them becomes pretty valuable.
Okay. Another question from Sumit. How do you get what was spent and what should have been spent, and hence the efficiency? Could it not just be a shift in consumer behavior?
So how do we get what was spent and what should have been spent? So we are able to do back testing against the plan because we have access to information. We're able to then look at certain types of TV data because that's available for back testing as well to say what actually happened and what was the set of awareness. We're obviously not able to see what would have happened if a certain brand had invested, another brand invested, and what the overall social reach would have been. in that scenario. We are able to, however, test against other programming. It could be a shift in consumer behavior, but again, because of the other metrics we're looking at, we're able to see what the leading indicators are that are going to get to that place and allow it to happen.
Okay, here's a question from Mark Jensen. Mark Jensen from Preston Kelly. For identifying content that plays to a target, you mentioned a value of $2 million equals a $42 million value. How do you calculate this?
So the $42 million was based on an investment that we saw from another company. That's how much they spent in order to get the same amount of awareness in the NCAA. And so the corollary was total awareness and total reach that was invested by the company to get the $42 million versus the $2 million that was invested by using and leveraging content.
Okay. Here's a question from Cassie Stocks from Jennings and Company. What about local? How does this translate to smaller markets?
Yeah, absolutely. The way we think about it today is that's one of the overlays, right? So with Foursquare opening up their data set and being able to use check-in data and geo-targeting to be able to get to hyper-local, if we're just talking about localization within a specific region, so like a credit card company that's trying to get to a specific segment in the Northeast, we can use some of the indicators to say, okay, how does that specifically get leveraged? I would say it's not a perfect science today. That's an area that certainly we need to do work on, but we're doing it through some of the overlays and then some of the indicators and language to make that happen. We're also doing it through relationships with some of the other companies, so satellite companies, so the satellite TV companies, with some of the other tracking services that are out there. Being able to apply and connect these data sets together is what becomes valuable, ultimately, because as a planning function, right, social is a leading indicator, but then we have to be able to filter it down, and geo becomes one of those filters that we leverage.
Okay, here's a question from Matt Weaver of Martino Flynn. What social networks did you collect the Jay-Z, LeBron James data from?
So it's a huge selection. As far as the actual audience itself, that's one of the pieces of secret sauce that we use at Network Insights that we obviously divulge to our clients. But telling you the specifics on a call like this would divulge some information I'm not allowed to. But I'm happy to have a conversation in private about it.
Okay. Here's a question from
just to give you frame and context, it's a specific segment that a customer wanted to go after and leverage as far as what was the point of view of their specific customer segment, rather than just saying, hey, overall, what do people think about these people?
Okay. Question from Mark Jensen, Preston Kelly. When finding a celebrity endorser, you talked about the amount of social buzz. Do you look at negative versus positive comments?
So we do use a sentiment approach within Network Insights. We do have sentiment access. What we're finding though is it's more about the trend than anything else. It also is how you do sentiment analysis becomes super valuable. So we do look at positive and negative. But what we look at in positive and negative is what is the impact on the ultimate trend. So sometimes negative buzz has a positive impact on the trend and ultimately leads to a positive outcome. So being able to leverage it in that way is where we are able to provide value. There are many companies, and the logic it would serve that, hey, if it's negative, it's bad. In reality, it isn't always that way. So being able to look at a trend versus just a single post and saying is it positive or negative, or saying the trend is leading negative, isn't where we found value. What we found is what impact does this have? If you're familiar with regression analysis, that's what we're able to do in its application.
Okay, here's a question from Leslie Zlotnick of the Yamaha Motor Corporation. How does a manufacturing corporation invest into product placement without spending too much on the production end of things? Would love to see our product get more exposure without having to overspend or spend at all.
Yeah, so the great thing is try and find how you're ultimately relevant, right? So you have to be contextually relevant. You have to be authentic. There's plenty of, if I think about the integrations that we've done with clients where they've spent $0 for the integration, it hasn't been because they walked in and they went to the salesperson who was responsible for the network and said, hey, we want to do this. No, it's because there's complete authenticity around the integration. If you're looking to have your product placed in a show because you think it's it has a great audience and therefore you ultimately want to just get exposure for your brand, but it isn't authentic, there's no way a creator is ever going to say, yeah, we want to do that. So it is a matter of having the discussion and conversation with the creator. And when you can walk in with empirical data and say, hey, here's the value we're going to deliver to you, it's not just about product integration, then you're able to have that discussion. Very similar to how we think about celebrities. We've been able to do this a number of times. So as Yamaha Motor Corporation, finding that out and figuring it out is, okay, what are the relevant places that we think we can attach to? What is the relevant content around our specific audiences that we ultimately want to target? Let's go and get exposure there, and let's leverage and use that.
Okay. So we have another question from Sumit of Mindshare. How do you track trends since most of it will be qualitative? And he's referring specifically to slide 24.
Specifically to slide 24. Let's go take a look at slide 24. Let's see, is this slide? This is slide 24, I think. Okay, there we go. How do we track trends? So as I mentioned at I think the beginning, we have a technology that we've developed, which we've named the Topical Discovery Engine. It's a topical discovery engine. It takes highly unstructured data, and it puts structure around it by looking for correlations within the information and within the data. I'll go that far because I know there's some people on the call that, I don't want to divulge more than that. So if that's the case, we're able to identify trends as they're happening, and we're able to use that to predict what else may be happening out there. So looking in the data, if you're able to see that, I looked for, I found that, hey, you know what, I searched on Duke and there was a bunch of conversation around Duke and that was really important. Well, that's great. But if ultimately our analytics are able to look across and say, okay, where are the velocity? Where are the indicators of change? We can use those indicators of change to say how fast is that growing and how fast is it declining. If we use those elements in there, we're able to figure out what is a trend and what is not. So that's exactly what we did, with the NCAA. And think of go back to the original macro trends slide. This is no different than what we used to do with the 37,000 interviews. And we used to figure out what the trends were, to go after a segmentation schema, which ultimately came out with 6 trends. Those 6 trends became our segments. We've just figured out a way to do it really, really fast, right? So instead of it taking 18 months, it's taking 15 minutes. And so in the capacity that we can do that, it allows our clients to take advantage of these trends very quickly. So this example, this NCAA example, we started the work around the NCAA example about 2 months ago. So getting from start of question to activation was a very short period of time. Why? Because we're able to get through massive amounts of information very quickly versus having humans that are reading through it and trying to figure out what the trend is or what ultimately is valuable.
Okay, and this is our last question from Sumit Batra.
Sumit, you're a question.
He is a curious guy.
Sumit, I have to meet you. I think I've actually met you before, but I.
All right, so he's asking, most marketing leaders say that bulk of negatively commenting audience would just move out instead of commenting, while positive responses would be much lower, and the impact of negative comments is much larger than a positive comment. So how does that still result in a positive lift in ROI?
Sure. So I think a classic example is Apple, right? I mean, if you think about the negative commentary that was happening around Apple, they have when they had AntennaGate, they had a number of people that came in from a positive standpoint. The negative discussions resulted in a massive groundswell of positive influencers coming in and saying, okay, hey, here's reality. We're going to protect the brand. We're going to move the brand up the stream. And so being able to do that, so that's where a negative thing resulted in much more positive. So what we saw in the trend was, as they looked at certain aspects of their business, they saw people defending not only on AntennaGate, but coming in and throwing in other positive commentary and other positive indicators around other things that Apple did. So all of a sudden, this negative thing, which was a certain size, basically created this massive positive inflow of a brand relationship. So certainly having that and allowing that to happen, we've seen that, and we've seen it with companies that have gone through recall processes, right? So as far as like, what does a recall look like? How do we move that forward? We've seen it with companies that have had a customer service disaster. If you think about the companies out there that are considered to be hugely successful in social, many of them started with a big negative thing happening to them that ultimately rose to a positive thing. So, and we've been able to see that in the data as we look at even just micro negativity that's happening.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dan. We all, I'm sure, really appreciate the time that you've taken to let us step inside your world. And as I understand it, you're going to be sending all the participants a copy of the slides so that they can review them, correct?
That's absolutely right. If you registered today and if you attended today, we're going to send out a copy of the slides for you to take a look at. And certainly if you have questions, you have my contact information. I'd be happy to engage in a chat with you, and we can go from there.
Hey, thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks so much. Take care.